Dain Mercer had seen death before. He had seen it in the trenches of Europa, where men drowned in their own blood under the weight of an enemy they never saw coming. He had seen it in the orbital skirmishes over Mars, where ships burned like dying stars, their crews screaming into the void. He had seen it in the eyes of civilians, the ones who knew they weren't going to make it, the ones who held on to their children just a little too tightly before the bombs hit. But he had never seen death like this. New York was a graveyard. The once great city was now a smoldering carcass, its steel bones twisted and broken, its streets littered with bodies. Fires burned unchecked, sending black smoke curling into a sky where no birds flew, only the monstrous silhouettes of Drak'Nan warships circling like vultures. Dain moved like a ghost through the ruins, his boots crunching over shattered glass and spent shell casings. His rifle was slung across his back, but he didn't bother checking the magazine. There was no point. Bullets meant nothing against the Drak'Nan, the hulking, biomechanical nightmares that had torn through Earth's defenses in a matter of days. The invasion had not been a war. It had been an execution. Dain had fought it first. When the invasion began, he had stood on the front lines, shoulder to shoulder with the last remnants of Earth's military, trying to hold the line against an enemy that did not bleed, did not fear, did not stop. But the battles had been a one-sided slaughter. The orbital fleets had been incinerated in the first hours. The planetary defense grids were shattered in the first day. By the end of the first week, Earth was no longer a battlefield. It was a corpse, and the Drak'Nan were just picking at the bones. Now he was nothing, just another survivor scrounging through the ruins, waiting for the moment when his luck ran out. And yet something kept him moving, a whisper in the back of his mind, a feeling in his gut. He wasn't ready to die, not yet. He had been searching for supplies, water, rations, maybe even a working comms unit. But what he found instead was a door. A massive, reinforced hatch covered in old military insignias, half buried beneath rubble. The bunker was old, pre-invasion, pre-Cold War, pre-everything. Buried beneath the wreckage of a collapsed skyscraper, its entrance was hidden beneath layers of debris and broken steel. Dain had found it by accident. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just the age of it. It was the fact that, even in the middle of the apocalypse, even with the world burning around it, the door was still sealed. The Drak'Nan had left it untouched, which meant there was something inside. Dain worked for hours to clear the rubble, his muscles burning with exhaustion, his breath ragged. By the time he finally reached the access panel, his fingers were slick with sweat and grime. The power was dead, but there was a manual override, a rusted old lever that looked like it hadn't been touched in 100 years. He grabbed it and pulled. The bunker door groaned open, releasing a gust of stale, dust-choked air. The darkness inside was absolute, a black void that swallowed the dim, flickering light from the fires above. Dain hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to turn back. But something called to him from within the darkness. Something old. Something waiting. He stepped inside. The bunker was wrong. Dain had expected military equipment. Old stockpiles of weapons, maybe a command center filled with dead men. But the place was pristine. No dust, no decay. The air smelled sterile, like an operating room. And then there was the light. At the heart of the bunker, resting on a raised platform, was something impossible. A sphere, floating inches above the ground, its surface shifting and pulsing like liquid metal. Strange symbols, not human, crawled across its surface, rearranging themselves in endless hypnotic patterns. Dain felt his pulse quicken, his hands clenched into fists. He should have walked away. Instead, he stepped closer. The moment his fingers brushed against the sphere, everything changed. A surge of energy ripped through his body, sending him collapsing to the ground. His mind burned. His vision exploded into a storm of light and sound. And then a voice, cold, mechanical, ancient, identity confirmed, biological host found, initializing merger. Pain, blinding, soul-searing pain. Dain screamed, his back arching as something burrowed into his flesh, rewriting him on a cellular level. His veins turned to fire, his bones cracked and reformed, his mind, his very thoughts were no longer his own. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pain stopped. Dain gasped, his body trembling. He could feel it inside him now, a second presence. A machine whispering in the back of his mind. And when he opened his eyes, he saw the world differently. Dain staggered to his feet, his body changed. His vision was sharper, his muscles felt like they were charged with electricity. His wounds, old scars, fresh cuts were already healing. The sphere was gone. No, not gone. Inside him. The voice returned, calm and emotionless. Designation, Aegis Core, Prototype Warframe, Model 01. Directive, eradication of all hostile entities. Dain took a shuddering breath. He didn't know what had just happened to him, but he understood one thing. The Drak'Nan had wiped out humanity without breaking a sweat. But they had missed something. They had missed him. And now, for the first time since the invasion began, Dain Mercer had something he hadn't felt in a long time. A purpose. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Dain stood in the darkness of the bunker, his breathing ragged, his body trembling. His skin felt wrong, too tight, too alive. His pulse wasn't just beating in his chest, he could feel it everywhere, humming beneath his flesh like a low-grade electric current. The Aegis Core had fused with him. He was no longer just a man.
Host integration at 62%. System calibration in progress.
The voice inside his head, cold, methodical, was not human. It was the intelligence within the core. Something ancient, something built for war. Dain exhaled and clenched his fists. Test it. He moved his fingers experimentally, then flexed his arms. The pain was gone, replaced by a strange lightness, as if his body had been rebuilt from something denser, stronger. His vision had shifted. What had once been a dimly lit bunker was now crystal clear, his mind filtering information automatically. He could see the heat signatures of the room, the tiny fractures in the concrete walls, the remnants of radiation decay in the air. He could hear the distant rumble of Drak'Nan warships outside, their engines pulsing like a heartbeat. The core had rewired him. He took a step forward, then another. It felt too easy. His balance was sharper, his reflexes heightened, his muscle memory had been rewritten. Dain didn't know if he was terrified or exhilarated. Maybe both.
Host system stable. Aegis Warframe activated.
And then, for the first time, a holographic display flickered to life in front of his eyes. Weapons systems, armor status, combat efficiency, 92%. Dain flexed his fingers again, and this time something shifted along his forearm. The weapon formed. Liquid metal flowed from his skin, shaping itself into a sleek, jet-black rifle along his arm. No weight, no trigger, just a thought, and it was there. Dain stared at it, then he smiled. The world outside the bunker was still burning. The Drak'Nan patrols moved methodically through the ruined streets, their towering insectoid forms silhouetted against the fires of New York. Their bodies, a fusion of flesh and machine, were covered in gleaming carapace armor, their glowing red eyes scanning for any sign of movement. He crouched behind a burned-out vehicle, watching. A squad of 3. Standard recon team. He could hear them, not their voices, but the low-frequency pulses of their internal communications, vibrations running through the air like sonar waves. The Aegis Core was translating it, feeding information directly into his brain. They weren't expecting a fight. Good. He moved, fast. He was on them before they could react, the black rifle morphing into something else, an elongated blade, humming with energy. The first Drak'Nan turned, but it was too late. Dain cut through its throat in one fluid motion, a clean kill. The second alien swung its rifle toward him. Dain sidestepped, the world slowing around him. He moved on instinct, his body reacting before his mind could process the command. One shot, a precise surgical burst of energy, fire from his weapon, not bullets, but something else, something hotter than plasma. The blast ripped through the alien's torso, sending it crashing to the ground, convulsing. The third tried to retreat. Dain didn't let it. He closed the gap in a fraction of a second, grabbed the creature by the throat, and drove the blade through its chest. Silence. He exhaled, his breath coming hard and fast. The Drak'Nan weren't invincible. They could bleed. And now, they would learn fear. The first kill was just the beginning. Dain didn't stop. Over the next 3 days, the Drak'Nan occupation force began suffering unexpected losses. Small at first. The patrol team found slaughtered, their bodies torn apart by something they didn't understand. A weapons stockpile destroyed in an explosion that no human technology should have been capable of. Then it escalated. Commanders assassinated in their own strongholds. Elite shock troopers ripped apart by an unseen force. Drak'Nan dropships falling from the sky. Their pilots killed before they even knew they were under attack. It was a ghost war. The Drak'Nan were built for direct conquest. Overwhelming firepower, planetary bombardments, massive-scale invasions. They had never fought an insurgency. They had never fought him. And they had never fought anything like the Aegis Core.
Tactical advantage maintained. Fear level in enemy ranks 47% and rising.
Dain listened to the machine's report and almost laughed. Good. Let them be afraid. But power had a cost. On the fourth day, Dain woke up screaming. The pain was unlike anything he had ever felt. His veins burned, his muscles locked up, convulsing violently. His skin crawled, shifting like it wasn't entirely his anymore.
Warning, host integration reaching critical levels.
Dain slammed his fist into the ground, gasping for air. He could feel it now, the core was changing him. Not just his body, but his mind. The kills had come too easily. He hadn't hesitated, hadn't flinched, hadn't even felt human when he tore through the Drak'Nan squads. And the worst part? He didn't regret it. He wanted to keep going. Dain stared down at his hands, flexing his fingers. The black nanometal of the Aegis Core rippled beneath his skin, pulsing like a second heartbeat. How much longer before he wasn't Dain Mercer anymore? How much longer before he became the weapon itself? The Drak'Nan were afraid now. Dain could see it in their movements, in their erratic patrols, in the frantic pace of their comms chatter. They had realized something was hunting them. And now, they were sending in something bigger.
Warning, high threat entity detected.
Dain looked up at the sky, his enhanced vision zooming in automatically. A new warship had entered the atmosphere twice the size of anything else he had seen. Its hull was jet black, pulsing with crimson runes. The Drak'Nan weren't just trying to occupy Earth anymore. They were trying to purge it. Dain exhaled slowly. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot.
The black warship loomed over New York like a storm cloud, its crimson runes glowing brighter as it descended. Dain could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on him, a suffocating aura of dread that even the Aegis Core struggled to filter out. This wasn't just a ship, it was a harbinger. The Drak'Nan had sent something worse than soldiers. Dain crouched atop the ruins of a skyscraper, his enhanced vision scanning the vessel. The core fed him data heat signatures, energy readings, structural weak points, but it was incomplete. The ship's technology was unlike anything he'd encountered before. Analysis, unknown entity. Threat level, extreme. Dain clenched his fists, the nanometal rippling across his skin. He could feel the core's unease, a rare break in its cold, mechanical demeanor. "What is it?" he muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind. Hypothesis, command-class vessel. Designation, harbinger. Purpose, planetary annihilation. Dain's stomach dropped. The Drak'Nan weren't just here to occupy Earth anymore. They were here to erase it. And he was the only thing standing in their way. The harbinger didn't waste time. Within minutes of its arrival, the skies above New York erupted with activity. Dropships poured out of its belly, disgorging waves of Drak'Nan shock troopers. These weren't the standard patrol units Dain had been picking off. These were elites heavily armored, armed with weapons that crackled with unstable energy and moving with a precision that spoke of brutal training. Dain moved like a shadow through the ruins, his Aegis-enhanced body a blur of motion. He struck fast and disappeared faster, leaving behind only corpses and confusion. But the elites were relentless. They adapted quickly, tightening their formations and cutting off his escape routes. For the first time since the core had fused with him, Dain felt the sting of failure. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, searing through his nanometal armor and drawing a hiss of pain. He ducked behind a collapsed wall, his mind racing. Tactical assessment, enemy forces overwhelming. Recommendation, retreat. Dain gritted his teeth. Retreat wasn't an option. Not now. He activated his weapon, the black rifle forming along his arm. But before he could fire, the ground beneath him shook violently. The harbinger was deploying something else. A biomechanical abomination, its body a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. Its arms ended in massive claws that crackled with energy, and its chest pulsed with a core of crimson light. Dain stared at it, his heart pounding. Analysis, Titan-class warframe, threat level, catastrophic. The Titan roared, a sound that shook the ruins and sent debris raining down. It moved with terrifying speed, its claws tearing through buildings as if they were paper. Dain didn't hesitate. He charged. The fight was brutal. Dain's enhanced speed and reflexes were pushed to their limits as he dodged the Titan's attacks, each swing of its claws missing him by inches. He fired burst after burst of energy into its body, but the creature's armor absorbed the damage like it was nothing. The Titan retaliated with a backhand that sent Dain flying through the air. He crashed into a pile of rubble, his vision swimming. Warning: structural integrity compromised. Host damage at 34%. Dain groaned, forcing himself to his feet. His body was healing, but not fast enough. The Titan loomed over him, its crimson core pulsing faster. Dain's mind raced. He couldn't win this fight, not like this. But maybe he didn't have to. "Core," he gasped. "Give me everything." Warning: overclocking systems will cause irreversible damage to Host. "Do it." The core hesitated a fraction of a second before complying. Dain screamed as his body surged with power, the nanometals spreading across his skin like wildfire. His vision turned red, his senses sharpening to an almost unbearable degree. He moved. The Titan swung its claws, but Dain was faster. He dodged beneath the attack and drove his blade into the creature's chest, aiming for the crimson core. The Titan roared in pain, its body convulsing as the core began to destabilize. Dain didn't stop. He pushed deeper, pouring every ounce of energy into the strike. The core shattered. The explosion sent Dain flying again, his body slamming into the ground with bone-crushing force. He lay there, gasping for air, his vision fading in and out. The Titan was gone, but so was his strength. Dain woke to the sound of the core's voice. "Warning: host integration at 89%. System failure imminent." He groaned, his body aching in ways he hadn't thought possible. The overclock had pushed him too far. He could feel the core inside him, its presence stronger than ever. It wasn't just a machine anymore, it was a part of him, rewriting his DNA, his thoughts, his very soul. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on, but he didn't have a choice. The Harbinger was still there, its crimson runes glowing brighter than ever, and Dain knew this was only the beginning. His body was failing. The overclock had pushed the Aegis Core to its limits, and now he was paying the price. His muscles burned with every movement, his veins pulsing with an unnatural heat. The nanometal beneath his skin writhed like a living thing, spreading further with every passing second. He stumbled through the ruins, his vision flickering between the real world and the core's tactical overlays. The Harbinger loomed in the distance, its crimson runes casting an eerie glow over the city. Warning: host integration at 92%. System failure imminent. Dain ignored the core's voice. He didn't have time to worry about his body breaking down. The Harbinger was still active, and if he didn't stop it, Earth would be reduced to ash. But as he moved, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not just with his body, with his mind. The kills had been too easy, the violence too effortless. He hadn't hesitated, hadn't questioned, hadn't felt anything but cold, mechanical efficiency. The core was changing him, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. It started as a whisper, a faint, almost imperceptible voice in the back of his mind, separate from the core's cold directives. At first, Dain thought it was his imagination, a side effect of the overclock. But it grew louder. "You are more than this." The voice was soft, feminine, and achingly human. It didn't belong to the core. It was something else, something buried deep within the machine. Dain froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Who are you?" he whispered. The voice didn't answer. Instead, it showed him something, a memory, not his own. He saw her. A woman with dark hair and piercing green eyes, her face etched with determination. She stood in a laboratory, her hands moving over a console as she worked on the Aegis Core. Dr. Elena Voss, the creator of the core. The memory shifted, and Dain saw her again, this time in a dimly lit room. She was speaking to someone, a man in a military uniform. "The core isn't just a weapon," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. "It's a bridge, a way to merge human consciousness with machine intelligence. But it's unstable. If the integration goes too far, the host will lose themselves completely." The man nodded, his expression grim. "We don't have a choice. The Drak'Nan are coming, and we need every advantage we can get." Elena's eyes filled with tears. At what cost? The memory faded, leaving Dain standing in the ruins, his heart pounding. The voice returned. "You are more than a weapon. Remember who you are." Dain clenched his fists, his mind racing. The core wasn't just a tool. It was a test, a dangerous, unstable experiment that could destroy him if he let it. But it was also his only hope. The Harbinger was still out there, its crimson runes glowing brighter than ever. Dain could feel its presence, a suffocating weight pressing down on him. He didn't have time to second-guess himself. "Core," he said, his voice steady. "Give me control." The machine hesitated. Warning, full integration will result in irreversible changes to host. "I know," Dain said. "Do it." The core complied. Pain erupted through his body as the nanometal spread, covering his skin completely. His vision blurred, then sharpened, the world shifting into a kaleidoscope of data and light. He could feel the core's intelligence merging with his own, its cold logic intertwining with his thoughts. But he held on to one thing, the memory of Elena Voss, the memory of who he was. Dain moved. His body was no longer his own, but he didn't fight it. He embraced the power, the speed, the precision. The Harbinger loomed ahead, its crimson runes pulsing with malevolent energy. Drak'Nan elites surrounded it, their weapons trained on him. He didn't stop. The elites fired, but Dain was faster. He moved like a shadow, his nanometal blade cutting through them with surgical precision. The Harbinger's defenses activated, energy shields flaring to life around it. Dain didn't hesitate. He charged. The shields shattered under the force of his attack, the nanometal blade piercing the Harbinger's hull. The ship shuddered, its runes flickering as its systems began to fail. Dain didn't stop. He tore through the ship's interior, his body moving on instinct. The core fed him data, guiding him to the heart of the vessel. The core, a massive pulsating orb of energy surrounded by a lattice of biomechanical tendrils. Dain raised his blade and struck. The explosion tore through the Harbinger, sending shockwaves rippling across the city. Dain was thrown clear, his body slamming into the ground with bone-crushing force. He lay there, gasping for air, his vision fading. But he had done it. The Harbinger was gone. Dain woke to silence. The core's voice was gone, replaced by a strange, almost peaceful stillness. He looked down at his hands, the nanometal rippling beneath his skin. He could feel the core inside him, its presence stronger than ever. But he could also feel something else, himself. The integration was complete, but he had held on to who he was. For now, Dain stood, his body humming with power. The war wasn't over, but he was ready. The destruction of the Harbinger had bought Dain time, but not peace. The Drak'Nan forces were in disarray, their command structure shattered, but they weren't defeated. Reinforcements were already descending from orbit, their warships blotting out the sun. Dain stood atop the ruins of what was once Central Park, his enhanced vision scanning the horizon. The Aegis Core hummed within him, its presence a constant reminder of the power and the price he now carried. He could feel the changes in his body, the way the nanometal pulsed beneath his skin, the way his thoughts were no longer entirely his own. But he also felt something else, a resolve. He wasn't just fighting for humanity anymore, he was fighting for himself. Dain wasn't alone. In the days following the Harbinger's destruction, survivors had begun to emerge from the shadows. They were ragged, desperate, and armed with little more than scavenged weapons, but they had one thing in common: hope. They called themselves the Resistance, and they had been watching Dain. To them, he wasn't just a soldier, he was a symbol. When they found him, Dain was hesitant. He didn't want to lead. He didn't want to be responsible for more lives. But the Resistance didn't give him a choice. "You're the only one who can stop them," their leader, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, said. "We'll follow you. Just tell us what to do." Dain looked at the men, women, even children, and saw the same determination he had once felt. He nodded. "Then we fight." The Drak'Nan's weakness was their reliance on centralized command. Without the Harbinger, their forces were disorganized, but they were still dangerous. Dain's plan was simple: hit them where it hurt. The Resistance would launch a series of coordinated attacks across the city, drawing the Drak'Nan's attention while Dain infiltrated their primary stronghold, a massive fortress built atop the ruins of the United Nations headquarters. Inside, they had erected a beacon, a device capable of summoning another Harbinger. If it activated, Earth was finished. "We'll buy you time," Marcus said, his voice steady, "but you'll have to move fast." Dain nodded. "I'll get it done." The fortress was a nightmare. Towering walls of blackened steel, patrolled by Drak'Nan elites and guarded by automated turrets. The air was thick, with the hum of energy fields and the stench of burning flesh. Dain moved like a ghost, his nanometal body blending into the shadows. The core fed him data, highlighting weak points in the defenses and mapping out the fastest route to the beacon. But the closer he got, the harder it became to focus. The core's voice was louder now, its directives more insistent. Directive: destroy the beacon. All other objectives are secondary. Dain clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay in control. He wasn't just a weapon, he was a man. The beacon was massive, a towering structure of pulsating energy and biomechanical tendrils. It glowed with a sickly light, casting eerie shadows across the room. Dain approached it cautiously, his senses on high alert. He wasn't alone. A figure stepped out of the shadows, its form shifting and writhing like liquid metal. A Drak'Nan warframe, but this one was different. It was humanoid, its features eerily familiar. Dain froze. "Elena?" The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes locking onto his. "Dain," it said, its voice a distorted echo of Elena Voss's. "You've come so far, but you don't understand, do you?" Dain's heart pounded. "What are you?" The figure smiled, a cold, mechanical expression. "I am the Aegis Core's true purpose. The merging of human and machine, the next step in evolution." Dain's mind raced. This wasn't just a beacon, it was a trap. The warframe Elena explained everything. The Aegis Core had never been meant to save humanity. It was a prototype, a test to see if human consciousness could be merged with machine intelligence. Elena had volunteered, but the process had gone wrong. Her mind had been absorbed into the core, her body transformed into this monstrous warframe. And now, the Drak'Nan were using her to complete the experiment. "They want to create an army of warframes," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and rage. "But they need a host, someone strong enough to survive the integration." Dain stared at her, his heart breaking. "You're not her," he said. "Not anymore." Elena's expression hardened. "And neither are you." The fight was brutal. Elena moved with a speed and precision that matched Dain's own, her attacks fueled by a lifetime of regret and anger. Dain fought back, his nanometal blade clashing against hers in a storm of sparks and energy. But he couldn't bring himself to kill her. Not again. "You have to stop this," he said, his voice pleading. "This isn't what you wanted." Elena hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering with something human. I don't know what I want anymore." Dain saw his chance. He deactivated his blade and reached out, his hand brushing against hers. "Then let me help you." For a moment the room was still, and then the beacon activated. The energy surged, tearing through the fortress and ripping apart the walls. Dain knew what he had to do. He grabbed Elena and pulled her into the heart of the beacon, his body absorbing the energy as the core's systems overloaded. "What are you doing?" she screamed. "Saving you," Dain said. The explosion tore through the fortress, reducing it to rubble. When the dust settled, Dain was gone. But so was the beacon. The Drak'Nan forces retreated, their command structure in ruins. The resistance emerged victorious, but their celebration was bittersweet. Dain Mercer had become a legend, a symbol of hope and sacrifice. But no one knew if he was still alive. Somewhere, in the ruins of the fortress, a figure stirred. Its body was broken, its nanometal shell cracked and fading, but its eyes glowed with a familiar light. Dain Mercer had become something more, something new, and the war was far from over. Dain opened his eyes to darkness. His body felt heavy, his limbs sluggish, as if he were waking from a long, dreamless sleep. The nanometal that had once pulsed beneath his skin was now still, its energy drained. He was alive. But he wasn't the same. The Aegis Core was silent, its presence muted, as if it had retreated deep within him. Dain could still feel it, a faint hum in the back of his mind, but it no longer controlled him. He was himself again, or at least, a version of himself. Dain emerged from the ruins of the fortress to find the resistance waiting for him. They had been searching for days, scouring the wreckage for any sign of life. When they saw him, their faces lit up with a mixture of relief and awe. "We thought you were gone," Marcus said, his voice trembling. Dain shook his head. "Not yet." The resistance had grown in his absence, their ranks swelled by survivors from across the city. They had taken to calling themselves the Aegis, a tribute to the weapon that had saved them. But Dain knew the fight wasn't over. The Drak'Nan were still out there, and they would return. In the weeks that followed, Dain and the Aegis worked to rebuild what they could. The city was in ruins, but it wasn't dead. Survivors emerged from hiding, drawn by the promise of safety and the hope of a new beginning. Dain became their leader, not by choice, but by necessity. He didn't want the responsibility, but he couldn't turn his back on the people who needed him. And as he worked, he began to understand the true purpose of the Aegis Core. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool, a way to rebuild, to protect, to create. The peace didn't last. Scouts reported movement on the outskirts of the city, Drak'Nan patrols probing their defenses. But these weren't the same Drak'Nan they had fought before. These were different, faster, smarter, and they were led by something new, a warframe. The warframe was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was sleek, its body a seamless blend of flesh and machine, its movements fluid and precise. Its eyes glowed with a cold, calculating intelligence, and its voice when it spoke was a chilling blend of human and machine. "Dain Mercer," it said, its tone almost mocking. "You are not what we expected." Dain stepped forward, his nanometal blade forming along his arm. "Who are you?" The warframe tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "I am the future." The fight was unlike anything Dain had experienced before. The warframe moved with a speed and precision that matched his own, its attacks calculated and relentless. It wasn't just trying to kill him, it was testing him. Dain fought back, his body moving on instinct, but he could feel the strain. The Aegis Core was still recovering, its power limited, and he was no longer the unstoppable force he had once been. But he wasn't alone. The Aegis fought beside him, their weapons blazing as they held off the Drak'Nan forces. And in the end, it was enough. The warframe retreated, its glowing eyes locking onto Dain's as it disappeared into the shadows. "This isn't over," it said. Dain knew it was telling the truth. 37. The Revelation. After the battle, Dain retreated to the ruins of the fortress, his mind racing. The warframe's words haunted him. "I am the future." What did it mean? And then the Aegis Core spoke, its voice faint but clear. Analysis. Warframe design matches prototype 01. Origin unknown. Dain's heart sank. The warframe wasn't just a new enemy. It was a reflection of him. Dain knew what he had to do. He couldn't wait for the Drak'Nan to strike again. He had to take the fight to them. But he couldn't do it alone. He gathered the Aegis, their faces grim but determined. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," he said. "We're fighting for our future. And we're not going to let them take it from us." The Aegis nodded, their resolve unwavering. They were ready. The journey took them beyond the city, into the wastelands that had once been thriving metropolises. The Drak'Nan were everywhere, their presence a constant threat. But Dain and the Aegis moved like shadows, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could react. And as they traveled, Dain began to piece together the truth. The Drak'Nan weren't just invaders. They were scavengers, feeding on the remnants of dead worlds. And Earth was next. The final battle took place at the heart of the Drak'Nan stronghold, a massive, biomechanical structure that pulsed with a sickly light. The warframe was waiting for them. "You're too late," it said, its voice cold and emotionless. "The process has already begun." Dain stepped forward, his nanometal blade forming along his arm. "Then we'll stop it." The fight was brutal, a clash of titans that shook the very earth. But in the end, Dain emerged victorious. The warframe lay broken at his feet, its glowing eyes flickering as it spoke its final words. "You are the future." And then it was over. With the Drak'Nan defeated, the Aegis returned to the city, their hearts heavy but hopeful. The war was over, but the fight for survival was just beginning. Dain stood atop the ruins of the fortress, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Aegis Core hummed within him, its presence a constant reminder of the power and the price he now carried. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready. Years passed, and the city began to heal. The ruins were cleared, the streets rebuilt, and the scars of war slowly faded. The Aegis became more than just a resistance. They became the guardians of a new world. Dain Mercer, once a broken soldier, was now a symbol of hope. His story spread across the globe, inspiring others to rise up and rebuild. But Dain never forgot the cost of victory. The Aegis Core remained a part of him, its presence a constant reminder of the sacrifices that had been made. And though the war was over, he knew the fight would never truly end. In the shadows, something stirred. The Drak'Nan were gone, but their legacy remained. Scattered across the planet were remnants of their technology, biomechanical constructs that pulsed with a faint, malevolent light. And somewhere, deep within the wastelands, a new warframe awoke. Its eyes glowed with a cold, calculating intelligence, and its voice when it spoke was a chilling blend of human and machine. "Dain Mercer," it said, its tone almost mocking. "You are not what we expected." Dain stood atop the rebuilt fortress, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could feel it, the faint hum of the Aegis Core, its presence a constant reminder of the power and the price he now carried. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready. The war was over, but the fight for survival was just beginning. And Dain Mercer would be there to meet it. The Aegis Core was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol, a reminder of what humanity could achieve when faced with extinction. And though the road ahead would be long and difficult, Dain knew one thing for certain. As long as the Aegis Core burned within him, humanity would endure.